This session's M&A insights, tips on driving up your company's value. And whether you plan to sell your company someday or never, there's a lot to learn from M&A activity reshaping the LBM community. In M&A insights, tips on driving up your company's value, moderators John D. Wagner and Ted Rieple will guide a candid discussion with a panel of leading acquirers, and I'm going to just kind of leave it with that. But these guys, John and Ted, are very good. They counsel a lot of lumber dealers on selling their companies, and the reason that we invite them back year after year is because they're the whole M&A thing can be very complicated, and and they demystify the process, which I think is really, really cool, and because it puts the power back in your hands. You understand what's going on. So with that, I'm turning it over to these guys.
Great. Thanks, Rick. Thanks for having us back. So the format, I'm John Wagner. The format for today is we've got a powerhouse panel here. We're going to let them introduce themselves. After that, Ted's going to read a disclaimer because we've got a publicly held company up here and there's some questions that are going to be unanswerable or off limits. We're going to keep Sally Lacey really busy. She's doing a double espresso right now because she's got the microphone, and we're going to do about 15 minutes of, and we have another mic back there. Great. So we really want to have some active Q&A, probably in the last 15 minutes or so of the presentation. We have an hour. And then what I'm going to do is, starting with Drew, we're going to let them introduce themselves. Then Ted's going to read the disclaimer, and then Ted's going to have the first question to the panel and get things going. Okay? So Drew, say hi.
Hello, I'm Drew Whitcomb. I lead transaction activity for Builders FirstSource. I first joined BMC at the beginning of 2018. And then joined Builders FirstSource when BMC and Builders FirstSource were merged. Sit in our Dallas office and work with our division presidents and our regional leads across the country on all of our acquisition and transaction activity.
I'm Jim Hooper, Senior Vice President of M&A for US LBM. I've been with US LBM almost 10 years now. I've been in the industry for most of my career. Prior to joining US LBM, I was with SRS distribution on the roofing distribution side. US LBM has been in existence since 2009. We've done 105 acquisitions over that period of time, and nice to be with you all.
Afternoon, my name's Steve Swinney, co-founder and CEO of Kodiak Building Partners. We started in 2011. Done about 50 acquisitions during that time and operate primarily in our LBM space, but then also in construction supplies and the gypsum space.
I'm Jason Blair. I'm the CEO of Tao Building Centers. We have locations in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Montana. We're a very old family-owned company founded in 1906. But as recently as 2009, we had only 3 locations. We have 30 today through the acquisition process. So in my role, I would guide that acquisition process when those are identified for Tao, in addition to my other roles. And I've been in the business for, painfully to say, 34 years. Just did the math in my head.
Thank you. My name is Ted Rieple. I'm with First West Mergers and Acquisition. John and I are partners together. So before we begin, I'd like to establish the ground rules for today's discussion. This panel will focus exclusively on sharing general industry insights and publicly available perspectives. Our distinguished panelists here will not disclose any confidential, proprietary, or material non-public information during our conversation. All discussion points will be limited to general industry practices, publicly available market data, and broad strategic perspectives commonly shared in professional forums. No confidential transaction details, proprietary business strategies, or sensitive acquisition information will be discussed or disclosed. Our panelists acknowledge their commitment to maintaining strict confidentiality regarding any sensitive business matters. This ensures that we'll have an informative and valuable discussion while respecting the professional obligations and fiduciary responsibilities that guide our industry. Thanks for your cooperation. Now that we have covered the ground rules, let's jump into our first topic, going from left to right and starting with Drew Whitcomb from BFS. Since we have LBM dealers located throughout the United States, and our audience today, they'd be interested in understanding how you determine geographic focus for your acquisitions.
Well, for Builders FirstSource, we're in, I believe, 44 states at present, and so over time we've focused on building out a presence in markets where we didn't previously have one. At this point, having grown pretty substantially across the country, I don't know there's any particular geographies that we would really focus on. I think for us, it's more idiosyncratic. It's where do we have less of a presence than we would like? Where are we missing particular capabilities, a truss, a millwork shop, installation services, things that we'd like to add to fill out the offering in a particular market? So I'd say it's more idiosyncratic. It's not as though we're looking at, we have some bullseye target on a particular area of the country, or we wouldn't consider a business that's for sale in another area of the country.
Okay.
Yeah, for us, I mean, when you've seen our growth over the last, let's call it 5 years, rewind the early days of US LBM, we started with the platform up in the Midwest and the Northeast. That was the platform that LT Gibson started our company on, and since then we've really tried to expand into markets where obviously a lot of the growth is happening. And 5 years ago we really looked at our footprint and we said, we're underexposed in a lot of the big housing markets in Florida and Texas and Arizona, so we've really focused on improving our exposure in those markets. And then recently, we've really looked at where a lot of the growth is happening. Obviously, there's been a lot of population migration going ever since COVID around the country into markets like Nashville, which is why we really targeted the Walker business that Ray talked about a little bit earlier. So we're focused on looking at the data as best we can. Obviously, it's moving around significantly with the affordability crisis that is happening in this country. I think there's a lot of secondary markets that maybe 5-6 years ago people didn't think were great housing markets that are becoming better housing markets today that we're focused on trying to get a good presence in as well. So we're not necessarily, like Drew said, I think we have somewhat of a similar mindset. We're just not going to laser focus on a market. We're really focused on how do we get the best companies in markets that we feel are going to be good growth markets long term, and ultimately that drives our strategy.
Yeah, so I'd say a lot of similar themes. When we started in 2011, we didn't have anything, and so we had a clean slate. Back then, we really thought a lot about really over the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, where do we see those migration and population growth patterns going? And so, our initial targets were really to focus on Colorado, Texas, and Florida. Took us several years to get something in Florida. Texas and Colorado were a little quicker. Today we're in about 30 states around the country. So, similarly, most of what we're thinking about is markets that at least to some extent we're involved in, at least from a regional perspective. How do we add density there? How do we add kind of product or customer focus and capabilities that maybe we don't have as much as we want to? Things of that nature. And then I think the one other thing is that you do have to kind of continue to think about that evolving landscape. Because obviously a lot's happened in our industry in the last 15 years from a consolidation standpoint. A lot's changed even from what markets are desirable. I mentioned Colorado, that's our home state. When we started out, Colorado was probably one of those big three that was incredibly desirable from a business friendly landscape, from an affordability landscape, and population growth. And frankly, the winds have changed some in our state. It's not as attractive as it was 15 years ago, just because of some of the regulatory landscape and then the ripple effect of affordability that's caused. So I think as we all kind of continue to grow and evolve, we're going to be thinking about how is that landscape changing? Does that make somewhere less or more desirable? And then we're going to lean in or sometimes pull back based on that.
Yeah, and for us it's different. So we're a regional player, and we are very focused on the 4 states that we function in today. Very mindful about how far from our headquarters, which is in Vancouver, Washington, mindful that the team that we've assembled can continue to support the entities that we have. We've also intentionally, to some significant, stayed away from these guys and focused on county seat markets. And there's some logic behind that, because we're not built like they are to be able to service the Seattle, the Portlands, the Boise markets. Like there's a lot of competition, both from pro dealers and box stores alike. We're a pretty healthy mix of 50% pro, 50% DIY traffic, and it's important for us to have markets that support that. So very intentionally, the counties, the physical counties in the West are very large geographically as compared to maybe when you get back into this part of the country. And so we look for county seat markets. They historically were the hub of commerce for decades in those states. And then in most cases, there's a great family-owned business in those markets that we can buy that business, maintain that name, and then pull forward that legacy. So that's been our focus, is to build this regional portfolio of companies, is what we've intentionally stuck to.
I think something you just touched on is really important for all of us in different ways, in that if you're going to be doing this whole acquisition thing, you got to be able to support your local operations and your local markets. Otherwise, there's no point for you to be doing this. And so, whether it's the strategy you just talked about, or maybe I'm sure what we're all thinking about is, do we have the regional kind of leadership and infrastructure to support and help grow an operation when you acquire it? I think is another big part of your strategy.
So I'm going to add, we'll start on this side with Jason and move down from right to left from the stage. This is really a twofold question, is that besides the buyers that are on the stage right now, the other major buyers would be Nation's Best, Building Industry Partners, and ABC Supply. These are the companies that are looking at your kinds of deals if you haven't been acquired at this time. Do you go a little bit on gut when you buy a company, or are you doing AI searches for permit pulls, multifamily? Do you using data to drive these decisions? Or do you kind of know a company by reputation and say, geez, we've always had our eye on that, those are nice guys over there? How much of it is data driven as opposed to culture and familiarity with the company?
Yeah, so for us, it's been more the latter. So it's been more through having this reputation in the Pacific Northwest that we're a company who likes to make acquisitions of family-owned businesses. And it does set us apart a little bit from the bigger groups, although we're quickly losing a bit of that as we grow as an organization. So we have, for the most part, the majority of our acquisitions have been brought to us through some relationship in the industry, in the geography, and then of course the rest of it has to work out. But we're not out running AI models and understanding things, but we are, when we get an opportunity, we will validate that the market's the type of market that's going to support us for the long haul. It's just our strategy. We've had more than enough come in than we could possibly acquire financially.
Great. Steve, same question?
Yeah, it's both. We keep a database of permits for every market in the country. We look at the projections for that. That's all really important. But equally important is all of those things you talked about. What do we know about the company and the leadership team and the culture and their approach and their history? I think it all matters. One's not a substitute for the other for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, being private equity owned, if I just went on gut feeling, I probably wouldn't be sitting up here, knowing how analytical the private equity world is. So for us, we have an approach where it's very collaborative with our PE sponsors. They trust our knowledge of the business, and we rely heavily on our local operators in a lot of instances to really help us understand the businesses in their local markets. Obviously, we know some of the larger national or regional players, and we're constantly in communication and building a relationship with those folks. But when it comes to tuck-in deals or smaller acquisitions that add to our footprint in certain markets, we really rely on our local operators. But at the same time, we're doing a lot of analytics around those businesses to determine how it's going to add to our presence in that market. Is it going to be a a geographic footprint where now it's going to allow us to more easily service the market as a whole? Is it going to allow us to have a different product category in the market that will allow us to sell more of the house to our certain customers? So there's a lot of analytics that go into it. Obviously, relationships and local knowledge plays into our decisions around that. But it's a combination of all those things that really drive our strategy.
I think from Builder FirstSource's perspective, it echoes a lot of what Jim said, where I wouldn't be sitting here if it was all gut. As a public company, we make our own determinations, but we do a lot of the same kind of data, right? We're all looking at permits, we're all looking at forecasts for spend, we're all looking at the details of operations, how logistical footprints might align, what opportunities there are for post-transaction improvement. But I think one of the key things, which I'm sure we'll touch on in later questions, is just the people at the business in question, right? A lot of that analytical data is somewhat of a gating item. It has valuation implications from our perspective, but the people that we're sitting across the table from, the people who, at least many of whom will continue to manage the business going forward, that element of fit is critical.
That's a good point. Like one thing that I'll add on that, I'll go back to the Walker deal, just because we're here in Nashville. We sat in front. I've joked with Ray a lot. He gave me the Heisman for about 5 years, probably more so than my wife gave me the Heisman during the courtship days with her. But I sat across from Ray for several years, and that relationship allowed us to really work through a lot of the deal aspects in a very amicable way. And so at the end of the day, the relationship does matter, and sometimes you do have a gut feel like this individual is going to fit culturally for us, it's going to be a great fit. And there's been times where we've looked at a P&L statement, it's looked great on paper, but you sit across the table from those people and you don't feel that same way. And we've walked away from deals in those instances too. So there are various qualitative and quantitative factors to all of these deals.
So I'd like to, one thing you said, Jim, you want to sell more of the house. And I know that, especially you three, and we'll hear from Jason about TAL, is that a lot of these companies, they buy the stick yards and then they start buying margin. They start buying the truss companies, they start buying the millwork, they start buying the window distributors. Is that an active strategy where you would go after margin you may be losing by selling, by giving that business to somebody you don't own? Will you go after a truss plant? Will you go after a millwork? Will you pick up a door shop for that reason, to bring that margin in to sell more of the house?
We have not done that to date. I think part of it is just scale. We have to be really careful at TAL to make sure that we don't buy things that are a distraction to the core business. So we're not at the scale of these guys. So when I think about, we own a truss plant, we own a rental yard, and for us, they're hard for us to manage. So my encouragement would be, if you are in the world of either wanting to be acquired or acquiring, is to be really thoughtful about the portfolio. At 30 stores, it makes it pretty hard for our portfolio to be super diverse. Like, these guys have, especially Steve's group, is very diverse. And so you have all these different companies, and maybe someday we can get there, but it's not where we're at today. So that's a little more challenging. But part of what we look at is making sure that we can pull forward whatever relationships. You talk about culture, and it's so important. I think it trumps any financials. Like I think I've heard you guys say, you can see the greatest financials in the world. If you're going to inherit a poor culture company, it could be devastating to the rest of your company. I think it's just as important to understand what their business relationships are out there as well. So when we've bought companies and looking through that, understanding that their top vendor list, and how are they buying trusses, or how are they buying, what is their window relationship like, what is their millwork, whatever that is, all those parts and pieces are really important to us, and probably a little different way than these guys.
Yeah. Steve, same question. You buying around the edges?
Yeah, no, I think ours, we definitely want to do, we got a customer that's got a lot of problems to solve, and we want to solve as many of them as we can, and as holistically as we can. We're really big believers in kind of the whole off-site construction, value-add distribution concept. So certainly where we've been in place where maybe we had a more kind of traditional core distribution offering, we're going to try to add to that. But very often we've led with those more value add if we can. Florida, as I mentioned earlier, we wanted to get in Florida from the beginning. Took us 6 years before we found the right entry point. And it was with a company that has a pretty significant off-site construction and value-add distribution and on-site management capabilities. And that's really what we led with, and we're actually probably doing more to add some of the more basic distribution items back into that now. So I think for us, it is really about having as many solutions in our tool belt as possible, and however we get into a market initially, adding to that and really creating a more holistic offering.
Yeah, our belief is that anything we can do to help the customer be more successful, they will pay for. And so when you look at what happened during COVID, I mean, they were willing to pay a higher premium for anything that helped their cycle times. Obviously, in the market that we're in today, they're looking for the opposite right now, anything that will save $1. And so, but that will change. It will come back to where they will start paying again for value-added services. And so when we enter into a market, we're constantly looking for areas where we can help the customer improve their cycle times, improve the way they deliver the product to their end users and customers. One of the things that we found, and I'm sure these folks will agree with this to a certain degree, is oftentimes the builders, the thing they like to least do is build the house. And so anything that we can do to help them in improving that effort for them is something that we found that is valuable to them. And so we focus on, if we enter into a market with just a traditional lumberyard, how can we add value-added services like truss or millwork or installation in some instances. So we're always constantly looking for ways where we can build more of the house or help them build more of the house through our product offerings, the services.
We'll echo a lot of that. Builders FirstSource and our public materials, we have this pie chart, and it's about 4 quarter slices. One would be millwork, windows, doors. One would be components and engineered wood products. One would be bulk lumber and sheet goods. And one would be everything else, installation services, non-wood products like siding. And so our goal is that every market that we serve kind of looks like that pie, right? That it's not a situation where it's 60% bulk commodities and only 40% other items that have a higher value-added component. And so many of the acquisitions that we've done, more than half are value-added focused, or they're truss plants, millwork, something like that. Just announced some millwork acquisitions in the Las Vegas market. And generally when we're buying broader line building materials distributors, it's to establish a presence in a market where we are not represented or we're underrepresented. Earlier this year, acquired Truckee Tahoe Lumber, building out the full platform in the Reno market as an example. So you have to serve your builder with all their needs, including the commodities, even when people really like the more value-added products. You have to be a full line, but want to make sure that we're represented and selling as much into the house like everyone else.
Jim, maybe you can answer this question starting out, but how important is the seller's market position when you're assessing an acquisition opportunity? I mean, clearly a smaller location, do you consider smaller deals? Knowing that you'd prefer probably a larger deal, but.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it depends on the market, but we've done deals where, less than $1 million in revenue all the way up to $700-800 million of revenue. And it really depends on what we're trying to accomplish with that acquisition. The smaller acquisitions, we may see an opportunity where in a bigger metro, let's call it Dallas-Fort Worth, where we're not being able to service the outer northern market of the DFW metro because of the fact that we don't have a presence up there, but there's an opportunity up there that's a smaller yard. We may say, hey, that makes a lot of sense because logistically now within the market it will allow us to service the entirety of the market and where some of the growth is happening. So I would say, size is really dependent upon the situation that we're trying to accomplish within certain markets, and we look at all types of sizes deals.
Steve, same question.
Yeah, I mean, we same thing. You're going to look at every opportunity out there that looks like a fit for all these things we've been talking about. Again, for me, it kind of goes back to something I said earlier, which is you got to have the network and the infrastructure to support that leadership team locally. And so, would we go into a completely brand new market with a company that does 10 million in sales that we don't have that support system around? No, because we wouldn't serve them well, we wouldn't integrate them well, we wouldn't have a successful partnership there together. But in most cases at this point, we don't have that problem. But I think it's just, I think when that size is super large or really small, there's just some different dynamics you got to think about to ensure that you're ready to support that operation.
Yeah, and I would agree the same. Like in our footprint, we've looked at some smaller deals that just help us extend the network. For example, we have a store in Friday Harbor, which is on San Juan Island, out north of Seattle, and it's a logistical nightmare because you have to haul everything out there on a ferry. And so we bought a location in Mount Vernon. It's a small operation that it's not going to ever make or break our company from a volume perspective, but it had enough land to operate as a mini distribution center, an offload point for us to run trucks out to that location. So those kind of things come along with the acquisition game.
So when Ted and I engage a client, we put together a deal book, which these folks eventually look at after they sign in the NDA process. We chart 4 or 5 key performance indicators, and they are sales, gross profit margin, OPEX as a percent of sales, EBITDA, and EBITDA percent. So I want to ask the panel, is one KPI that you focus on more than any other? Do you like a lot of market share, and you can go in and improve the EBITDA and improve the gross profit margin, or do you look for health in one or another, or are they kind of weighted equally?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that question, about how to answer that, and it's really hard. I think each deal is very different. We've had opportunities where we've seen really great sales volume and lots of margin opportunity, which might mean a mediocre EBITDA, or we might have seen a really nice EBITDA with a really low sales number, and maybe their margin's too high for the market, and there's all this opportunity. So I think that when you're walking down the path of the opportunity, they all become equitable, potentially at first, and then maybe one area that starts to sway the deal in one way or the other, right? I don't know that I've ever looked at one where they were all like exactly what you wanted them to be. I think you weight each one as you walk through that transaction and understand that you want to be able to, obviously, when you acquire and you layer in efficiencies, you want it to be better than it was at some point after you acquire it. Probably doesn't happen right away, but eventually it will. So you have to understand what that balancing act looks like to get it there.
Well, first of all, John, you told us you only send the books to us. I didn't. I'm kind of shocked here. I didn't know that.
I slipped up on that. Just Kodiak seats.
That's why it's always BCC, everybody.
Yeah, right. No, I mean, listen, I think if you had to pick one, then you're going to think about EBITDA, because ultimately it's an amalgamation of all the rest, right? And it's the bottom line. But I think all are really important. I mean, you learn a lot about the company through every one of those measures. How efficiently are they operating? You're going to see OPEX. How's the pricing strategy? You're going to see that in your margins. How's the sales team? You're going to see that in sales and share dynamics. So I think all of it's important, and we really do, and I know all these guys do, we really do a ton of work to really understand that business, and like you said, understand not only where they're at today, but where are the opportunities, where are the things that we want to work on together. And again, are there things that we can bring to the table to help round out that? Because typically, almost always, we're looking at really great companies. And so we're trying to partner with great companies and then work together to get better.
Let me before we go to Jim, let me just ask to the panel generally, and we'll pick up with you on this and then go on. Do you ever take on a project where you see the COGS are too high and it's suppressing gross profit margin? You see an opportunity to take on a project. You see an opportunity to cut OPEX and drive up an EBITDA. Will you do that on betting on the company?
Well, certainly in terms of opportunities. I think someone said it earlier. Like, there's certain projects we don't really take on, which is a really bad culture. That's not a project we've ever intentionally taken on. We've taken it on unintentionally a time or two. But I think that's really hard to do. And our experience has been probably not a real worthwhile use of our time. We focus on, and Victoria was up here on the last panel, like something like Shepley is a great example for us. Great company, great leadership team, great culture, great market, and we can all work together to make it even better. That's our ideal.
I would echo that for Builders FirstSource. There are different kinds of projects. There are discrete improvement projects, and then there are more nebulous diagnosing problems and turning things around projects, and we would very much like to avoid the latter. I think your example with Shepley, I think for us, often that's underexploited opportunities. Businesses may not have been able to exploit certain things. Maybe they didn't sell much trust because they didn't have the experience. Maybe in Builders FirstSource can bring a lot of resources. So it's a project, but it's a prospective, beneficial project. It's not a turnaround type project.
Jim?
I would say if you're asking what is the most important of the metrics, I would say all of them. Reason being, when you think about the opportunity, and I think us up here have probably had a lot of experience in this aspect. When you think about some of the companies we've bought over the years, and this is, many of you are independents in this room, and so this is no knock on independents or kind of family-owned businesses, but in a lot of instances, family-owned businesses can be lifestyle businesses, and you're generating, in some instances, high-quality income, you're generating high EBITDA, you're generating good gross margins, and in some instances, you don't even know that there's opportunity there. And so one of the things that we come in and we try to push those metrics in every single which way, because we believe that given some of the resources that we can provide as a larger operation, whether it be scale, whether it be shared services on the OPEX side, whether it be opportunities to grow in different product categories, there's opportunities to grow in each one of those metrics. And that's what's ultimately driven our success from an acquisition standpoint, is we can buy a great company that may have great metrics from that mindset, but be able to take them to a whole different level based on some of the resources that we could provide. And so we focus on every single one of those and try to determine what the opportunity is in each one of those metrics.
Ted, you want to go with a couple?
Yeah, well, Steve, maybe you can answer this question to start out at least, but since many of the sellers that we represent are thinking about retiring after acquisition, and what do you look for in terms of leadership continuity in a situation like that?
Yeah, I think first thing I'd say is I think the biggest compliment you can have to a leader is that they've left, when that time does come, they've left the company in a position to be even more successful than when they did it. And that's the leadership team that they built. That's the culture that they built and the engagement of employees that they built in that market. But it is really important because in most cases, what you just described is probably the majority of the time the catalyst for a conversation that we have with a seller. They've gotten to a point where they're looking to do some other things, and for whatever reason, there's not kind of that next generation that does want to step in, or it's not the right time, and so they call you guys, and then you guys apparently call all of us. And so, yeah, it's super important to understand who have they developed and how have they done that. We don't mind plugging some holes in that, and sometimes you do have some. But I think to have a good core and know what the game plan is, and then for us to be able to come in and get to know that team, and then kind of help with that transition. And again, use Shepley as an example again for us. Tony's moving towards that point, and that's been a multi-year conversation for us. We talked about it during the deal process, knowing that was eventually coming. We've worked on it kind of over the last few years, and I think Tony's going to be one of those great leaders that you can look at and say, wow, as great as he was, he left the company in a place where it's going to be even more successful in the next stage because of what he's built.
Yeah, I'd add on that I agree wholeheartedly with what you said, Steve. That's been one of our biggest transitional challenges. So if you're thinking about selling, think about what life would be if you couldn't come to work for the next 6 months. If you're the CEO and the CFO and the head purchasing person and also the person that sends off the replenishment order, and you're the HR manager and you also schedule trucks, there are some people, maybe not in this room, but some people that do that. And think about what it's like if you want to retire and you want to sell your business and somebody has to fill that void. And typically that there isn't a person that can do what you do as an owner because you carry the business in a very different way. So when you think about succession planning and preparing to sell, think about how you build that bench in order to be able to carry that legacy forward. And I think that's really hard for sellers. I think that sometimes they don't realize how much they're doing. And then when you start to remove them, it just, these big gaps in process and ability pop up really fast. And if we have a tough time in the cultural transition of a company, it's every time I can go back to that's the root cause, is they were doing something that they didn't know they were doing. And trying to replace that is really complicated. Especially as you start consolidating services and pulling purchasing into a central office, it's a challenge. So be thoughtful about that if you're thinking about preparing to move on.
Yeah, one of the things that I think makes this industry so unique is the legacies that a lot of companies in this room have built over decades, if not centuries. I know many of you were awarded the Century Club last night, and that is something that I think we as acquirers, and I believe all of us up here have this mindset, is you have to respect that and you have to really appreciate that when you're doing an acquisition. And so, one of the things we talk about, and I talk about a lot with my team, is, we've done 105 acquisitions. So when we're getting into the process, it's old hat for us. We kind of know what we're doing on a day-to-day basis on what it means and the process and all the different steps that have to take place. But when you're sitting across the table from people, this may be a once-in-a-lifetime, once-in-a-generational moment for them, and you have to respect that and help them understand that. And so we take a lot of pride in holding their hand through that process, helping them understand what this means for them. And then from a leadership transition perspective, we don't buy companies in which the leadership just wants to be on the beach in a week. Like, we know that the leadership transition is an incredibly important aspect of any acquisition. So we'll work with them to understand, okay, what's your next layer of management? What's your succession planning? And then also, it's a very emotional aspect for a lot of these owner-operators to transition into retirement. And so if they desire to do that, but they want to do it over a period of time, we help them walk into retirement rather than run, let's say. And so we have not a one-size-fits-all approach to that dynamic based on individual circumstances on each deal.
If I were going to try and distill all this, I would say that there actually needs to be a succession plan. What it looks like can vary dramatically, but all the good ones will rhyme. So I think one of the most important things is just as the dialogue is progressing, and maybe we've already reached the basic terms of a deal, letter of intent, and you're working towards a closing, I would encourage any seller to just talk very frankly around what that looks like. I mean, at that point, it's a team sport, right? The acquirer wants to know that the business will continue, that they're buying a durable business, a durable group of people, and the seller wants to know their legacy will be preserved and that the business will endure and the people that have done much great work for them and the company will continue to have great opportunities. And the likelihood of that all occurring is highest when there's just a direct, forthright discussion about who does what and who's capable and who is best positioned to sooner or later be in a succession position. And I'd encourage all sellers to sort of take the counterintuitive attitude, I'm sure, after you and family have built businesses for a long time, that the less you're needed, the better your business is. And it will improve your outcome in a transaction, and it will improve the acquiring partner's satisfaction with the transaction. I think it will really be a win-win situation if you are thinking about the future that doesn't require you. And that doesn't mean the future can't include you. It doesn't mean there isn't tons to add. I mean, at Builders FirstSource, we have a ton of people who have been majority owners, 100% owners of businesses who continue to work in the business after a transaction for an extended period of time. But I think in most of those situations, even there, right, if they're not necessary in every element, to echo the comment about people doing things they don't even know they're doing, right, you would want that go-forward involvement to be strategic, to be sales-driven, to be executing on those underutilized opportunities together, as opposed to sort of in the nitty-gritty every day, right? It's a bit counterintuitive, but the extent to which you can build up the team around you and empower that team just puts everything in a position for all-around better outcome when there is a transaction.
Yeah, thanks, bro.
The only thing I would add, just to again synthesize some of this, is that your companies are bought on a multiple of EBITDA, and the EBITDA that's achieved by the management team that will stay in place is the most trustworthy one to which these guys will apply the multiple, and the multiple will probably be higher if you've got a really defined succession plan, and in your deal book when you're working with your investment banker, that should be an upfront section of it. You shouldn't hide that and say, well, here's what we're kind of thinking. You should really have a very deliberate plan in place to preserve the EBITDA on which these guys are valuing your company. So we just have 2 hours to go. I'm kidding. So we have about 15 or 16 minutes. We want to have some questions. Ted, do you have another question for the group? We can start to hand the mic around.
No, let's go ahead and ask.
Yeah. While we're waiting for that, and as you're formulating that, one thing I'd like to ask, and maybe we can blend it into the answers in the rest of today, is, Home Depot came to the IBS show last year for the first time in like 25 years. And if you look at the companies that Lowe's and Home Depot are buying, they've got, SRS has got 4,000 trucks. So there's some, we've heard there's footsteps that these people are starting to recognize, the Lowe's and Home Depots, that dropping framing kits off and doing the lot specific deliveries and model, specific kits of supplies. The big guys are starting to look at that and realize, and that's really where we differentiate against the home centers, is that kind of personal 4 a.m., 6 a.m., framing kit deliveries. So keep that in mind. And I wonder if that's in your thought as well, is do you think the big boxes are going to come after your operations at the same level of customer care and focus on the contractor base? Instead of what Home Depot and Lowe's have done, up till now, which people walk in and buy stuff and cart it off to their own job site. So I'll just put that in the air. But there's some questions already. You want to get a mic going? Did somebody have their hand up? Yeah. Take the mic and we'll.
Hi. You have mentioned several times about the cultural fit. How do you ascertain what's a culture? I mean, every company, family-owned company has a different culture. How do you make that determination that it's a good fit? Do you interview the employees, the customers? Where do you get your secret sauce from?
Yeah, I think there's several things you do. I mean, number one, as you can imagine, sellers aren't real fond if you call up their customers and say, hey, we're looking at acquiring these guys. What do you think about them? But you do know, we all do this for a fair amount of time. I mean, these two guys, this is their full-time job. And, I got someone who it's his full-time job, and then I think Jim, you mentioned that the importance in our models of our local operators who are telling us about their competition and someone they know in the next market over or whatever the case may be. So we learn about it that way, and then there's no substitute for the fact that we spend time with the seller. and get to know them, get to know the history of the business, get to know, ask them, what is the culture? What's important to you? What are you looking for in a partner that you're going to entrust this legacy that you've created for, a generation, 2, 3, 4 generations? And there's just no substitute for building the relationship the way I think, Jim, you were talking about, with here in Nashville. So that's really the biggest thing. But then certainly, you've heard things, you try to find out what everyone else says about them as well. And the cool thing, I think, for all of us is that, and I've worked in other industries prior to getting into this industry in 2007 initially. The really neat thing about that is the vast majority of the time, they're pretty special cultures and they're pretty amazing people. So even if you end up not being from our perspective, you don't end up being the winner, you usually come away making some new friends and meeting some people you really respect and learn something from.
And we try to pick up on certain aspects. I mean, I think it's pretty evident when you spend some time with some of these business owners, how they treat their people. And when you walk around the yard, you're doing, a site visit perhaps, and every single person that comes up to them, they know them by name, let's say. That shows how engaged they are in the business, that shows how respected they are and how the respect that they show their people in their business all the way down to the yard level employees. So there's certain things that we try to pick up on that shows just the cultural aspect of how they're treating their people, how they think about treating their customers. So it's not necessarily certain checklists that we go through, but I talk about this with our team a lot. M&A, in my opinion, is just as much an art as it is a science. There is an aspect to it where you really have to read the people side of the business from an artistic standpoint versus just looking at the numbers and looking at all the quantitative factors. And so, one of the things my CEO joked a couple of years ago, I like to play golf, and so oftentimes I go out with these business owners to also understand their competitive environment. We'll play a little game on the golf course and try to understand how competitive they are, because I want to know, are they wanting to be competitive? Are they wanting to go out and take market share, et cetera? So my CEO joked, we did a deal in Scottsdale, we did a deal in Myrtle Beach, we were doing deals in Florida. He said, are you just going around playing all these great golf courses? But the theory behind that is I want to know how competitive they are. I want to know, are they going to push the envelope to try to grow? Because when we acquire a company, we're just not acquiring it to stay status quo. We're acquiring it because we want to add resources to it to help them grow as well.
I think the other thing that comes into play is the vendor community provides some pretty interesting feedback pretty early on in the process to know whether or not, if they know you well, at least in my case, because we're regional, we're dealing with typically the same group of vendors. They often have been also the source of the referral for the opportunity. Typically, they do a great job of filtering for us, saying, hey, this is not somebody that looks like the rest of your locations or acts like you act as an organization. So I think that, in addition to what these guys said, having that, it doesn't mean that you can't be a great negotiator in the vendor community. Sometimes that's actually a really good benefit, but are you easy to do business with? And that's a different ballgame. That tells a lot to me about how it's going to be to acquire the company and deal with all the systems integrations and all the pieces and parts that come along with that.
I would just add 2 quick things. I think this is a relationship industry, right? Helping people solve problems every day. So, reputations are out there and they go a long way. And our people in the market have an ear to that. And the other is just that a good culture is hard to fake. I think it's one of those things where the sign, perhaps, of a less than ideal culture is not so much that from where we sit, you see problems, but it's the lack of seeing some things that are commonly indicators of a good culture. So it's. I guess that's the way I think about it.
Some other questions? We got 2 mics to roam around.
After you've gone through the process of valuing the business, what's your philosophy on the real estate the business sits on, and what do you look for on the property? Do you lease? Do you purchase it? And if you do purchase it, what do you look for in a real estate transition like that?
So I can take that at first.
Yeah, go.
Being private equity owned, and I'm sure whether you're private equity, whether you're public, whether you're family owned business, you only have a certain amount of capital, right, in most instances. And so we have the mindset of we'd like to use our capital to grow the business either through adding new product lines, doing more acquisitions, rather than having capital tied up in real estate. And so our preferred structure is to always lease the real estate. Now, when we do an acquisition, we recognize that owners may desire to exit the business and the real estate at the same time. And we have solutions to that too, where we can bring in sale leaseback providers to ultimately lease the property. And so we get to the same outcome, and you get to the same outcome as a seller as well. But our philosophy is to not have a ton of capital tied up in the real estate.
We have the exact same approach, so I save some time on this one.
I think ours is the same, except we have started buying more facilities if there's something unique about them, or they'd be particularly hard to move one day. You know, if you're doing millwork in a tilt-up commercial building, well, that's a commodity. You can always move. If it's a yard location that is particularly advantageous, like let's say on a yard in Southern California, where you can't build and develop a new yard, right? That might be something, even if the price is fairly dramatic, might be something worth acquiring from our perspective to have the long-term staying power. But all else equal, prefer to lease.
We actually prefer to lease intentionally because we want to lease from the person we're buying the business from, because we're buying in these small communities, so we want them to continue to support us for the long term in those small communities. It actually is a win-win in that case for us.
So typically in acquisition, if there's a lease involved, you'll get an initial 5-year lease with likely 2 or 3 5-year additional options. And there's rent increases tied to the CPI, various things that you have to negotiate. But if you do that, and then 5 years, 4 years, 3 years later, you decide to sell it to a REIT, and you want to get rid of the land, you've got a long-term tenant in place with commitment for lease renewals. So we've done deals where it works both ways, real estate or lease, and typically the real estate closes or tries to close the same day as the business transaction, whether it's leased or purchased. So. Back there.
Yeah, I just had a question about how technology plays a role in the acquisition process for a seller, and what do you look at when you're looking at a seller and the technology that they have as a dealer today?
So the question is about what kind of technology you look for on site. And you mean design capability?
ERP systems that they have. Yep.
Okay. Any thoughts?
You want to take that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's certainly not a factor in are we going to be interested or not. I think much like a lot of these other things, understanding how that team is using technology and how they think about it, that feeds more into the cultural and the strategic approach. As far as the systems themselves, ultimately we want to have the best tools and the best resources in the hands of our local teams as possible. And so, sometimes we end up collaboratively working through and deciding to make a change with maybe an ERP system. Maybe there's things that we bring that we say, hey, we're using this bolt-on for this aspect or that. But I think more importantly than anything is the cultural and the strategic understanding of how that team is using technology, because it obviously is a really important part of all of us being successful today.
Yeah, our view on technology is, when we're assessing an acquisition, it's not necessarily the technology that you have today. It's the mindset of the business on what they're willing to adapt in the future. So that may mean, what ERP are you running today? How willing are you to adapt to a changing ERP environment coming onto our systems? And also just thinking about technology advancements as a whole in our industry. I personally think there's going to be more that changes technology-wise over the next 5 to 10 years in our space that has taken place over the last 30 or 40 years. And I think that's partly going back to, John, your entry around the question around Lowe's, Home Depot, and some of the bigger investments that are coming into the space. I personally think that this is going to be a quality aspect of the industry over the next decade plus, is having this investment. When you think about our industry, if we're all being honest, we're behind from a technology perspective as it relates to other industries. And the only way to fix that is having big investments from a technology perspective. And having players like Home Depot, Lowe's, Builders FirstSource, US LBM, Kodiak, all these bigger players that now have size and scale to invest in the technology is hopefully going to bring our industry up a level technology-wise, which will ultimately drive down costs for the end consumer, et cetera. So I was talking to a couple people over the last couple of weeks. I kind of compare our industry to the airline industry 30 years ago. When you think about the airline industry, when you were buying a plane ticket in the 90s, you were calling somebody, you were calling a travel agent, they'd give you a price. You'd say, okay, that sounds good. You may call one other person. Okay, just book it for me. Well, now today, look at how quickly we can book an airline ticket. We have price transparency. There's been massive consolidation in the airline industry, just like consolidation is occurring in our industry. So there's less competition, but there's prices that have been driven down. And also, these businesses are much more profitable today than they were 30 years ago as well. So bottom line is, I think the technology advancements will elevate our industry, frankly, to a level that I think we need to get to as an industry if we're going to solve a lot of the problems that exist in our industry from an affordability perspective and the end user experience.
I would just reinforce that it's about the flexibility of the business that we might be acquiring, because I can't think of an instance where a business we acquired had a technology service or anything in place that was extraordinary from our perspective. It's sort of the reality of a lot of what we do is similar, and we have similar providers or service offerings or homegrown software to serve those needs. So it's more about, I would like to be proven wrong one day, but it's unlikely that a capability you have in place would be viewed as extraordinary from our perspective. It's more about just flexibility, because things will be changing, and ensuring that the team can adapt.
So we probably have time for one more question then. Rick, did you have, is Rick Schumacher here? Is there a housekeeping announcement you want to make before we adjourn? Just check with Rick. We've got time for one more. Anybody else? Not one more question? All right. Rick, do you have a housekeeping announcement before we adjourn and thank our panelists? Yes. Okay.
Actually, no, you can make your, well, yeah, I'll do okay. I'll do okay.
Yeah.
I'll make sure it's really, really good. Okay. Okay, so once this is over, we're going to start our, is my mic on? Okay. So once this is over, we're going to go into hot topic roundtable sessions. So we're going to have, there's going to be 5 of them. And so we're going to have, there's going to be one is going to be recruiting next gen pros. That's going to be across the hall in Riverbed A. There's signs by the doors so you can see it, but just right across the hall. There's one on leveraging AI. That's in Riverhead B, again, right across the hall. Ray Hales and the Second Chance program with Walker Lumber, Riverbed C. So if you want to learn more about what they do. And then in this room, we're going to have succession planning on one side, and we're going to have mergers and acquisitions on the other side. So that's after this. Thanks.
So I want to thank the panelists. They took a lot of time out of their day to fly here, just like all of you. And I think we had a great hour together. Thank you very, very much.